Hello and welcome to the channel. Today I would like to present you an obscure German cavalry sword that was used during World War I and commonly referred to as an Ersaztwaffe, meaning basically a sort of auxiliary or support weapon for the troopers. It has no year or name designation, and the explanation is found within the early stages of the war. The initial phases of the war didn't go exactly as foreseen, and this is because when the conflict started, everybody thought that it would be over in just a few months, as did the wars of the previous century, such as, for example, the Franco-Austrian War of 1859, the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, or the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, all of them having lasted a few months only. And this made nations overconfident in their planning, betting everything on quick, lightning-fast offensives that were sure to knock the enemy in one swift stroke. Some other nations, like France, were motivated by revenge and determined to end it as quickly and brutally as possible. However, following the outcome of the first year of the fighting, it became obvious that this wouldn't be the case, and as the war dragged on, well, so did the military resources, and it left the combatant nations scrambling to avoid the disaster of shortages. In an effort to salvage as much equipment and material as possible, drastic measures had to be taken, such as, for example, diverting metals and alloys for ammunition, reissuing old surplus stock or captured weapons, converting former obsolete weapons so that they could be of use yet again, and last but not least, halting export sword shipments and reusing them for their own troops. In German sources and the literature, some of these weapons are called Ersaztwaffe or auxiliary weapons, rough translation, being swords that were reissued beyond their initial purpose, a bit like emergency weapons. And this is the category that applies the most to this sword, which is a pretty obscure model having no date or year designation. And the problem is that most of the archives and sources were either lost or destroyed during the wars. So it is pretty hard to accurately say what it was. However, what we do know is that it was used by the German army during the war, and it is possible to pinpoint this sword as being one of those that was made for export and whose shipment was cancelled during the war. The first thing that you can see is that it is one of those clones of the French light cavalry sword model 1822, but made more crudely and under German or Germanic fashion. It has a standard brass hilt with knuckle bow and two branches and a round pommel cap. The grip is made of wood wrapped in leather, and it has a curved blade. The blade is actually a throwback to the 1852-79 sword, being a lightly curved but a bit heavy-nosed pipeback type. Some of these had inspection stamps on the back of the blade with the date of issue, but this one unfortunately doesn't. Most of these swords had blackened single ring scabbards made of steel with one loose ring, which is a break from the previous cavalry swords who had fixed rings. As I stated earlier, sources are not 100% certain where it came from, but the most possible theory would be that this sword, or at least some of its components, was initially expected to have been shipped to foreign markets, more specifically Mexico, which makes some sense because some specimens have the blades stamped with the letters RM, the Republic of Mexico, and Libertad on the other side, yet having German inspection stamps on the back of the blade, meaning that they were given to German troops. Some other theory is that it could have been made from parts of captured Allied arsenals, mostly in Belgium and France, and later merged with German parts, either in Germany or in German occupied territory. Thankfully, we have pictures, a couple of good pictures that show the sword being carried by men during the war, some of them being NCOs, and probably carried in the field. Some of my references mention a specimen that was marked on the hilt to a trained unit, so we can assume that this was not just exclusively carried by the cavalrymen, but also by the trained units of the German army, thus proving that it was used to a good extent during the war, which is not so surprising considering its shady origins, but then again, the Germans were always excellent in making good use of their resources, and this is no exception. Last thing to point out is that it's a very Germanic sword, meaning that the blade is frankly a bit too heavy for what it is, and I sometimes feel that the wood grip is going to break because of the weight and point of balance of the blade, which is located a bit too far. In this sense, it really is the spawn of the Prussian 1852-79 sword, and that's not a very good thing. It is, however, a collector's piece or a good target because it is rare and not easily found. I suspect that those with regimental markings must fetch a good price on auctions or dealer sites. So this covers the sword. You can check my sources and references below if you want to know more technical details about it. Thanks for having watched the video, and I'll be seeing you on the next one.